My name is Donna Lucas, and I'm here to welcome you today, and I am a proud member of the Public Policy Institute of California's Board of Directors. And thank you for joining us today for a discussion of governance in California. This event is supported with funding from the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation and from the California Endowment. And if you didn't see the Sacramento Bee this morning, there's a fantastic ad in there that the endowment put in there about what they are doing to keep kids in school, about suspension. And they also do a fantastic program on Health Happens Here. So we want to thank Daniel and Marlon, who are here today, for your support. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to do two things. First of all, can you turn off your Blackberries or your cell phones or your iPhones or your iPads or whatever? And second of all, could you look on the table? There's a form there to review the program. If you can give us your thoughts about the program, it's very helpful for us as we're doing further programs. So if you could fill that out and turn that in upon your departure, that would be great. Now on to the program. We will first hear from PPIC's president, Mark Baldassare, and he'll be talking about his findings of the new PPIC report, Improving California's Democracy. Next, we'll hear from Pat Morrison. Where's Pat? What hat do you have on today, Pat? We have to see that. Pat Morrison, who always has the best hats, no matter what. She's a well-known journalist, author, and radio television personality, and she'll moderate two panels about improving governance in California. At 12:15, the formal program will conclude, and we'll break for an informal program and a buffet lunch, and we hope you all stick around and continue your conversations at your tables. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mark Baldassare, who will come up and talk about the findings of the research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna, and thank you so much for your service on PPIC's board of directors. So it's really fantastic to have you part of PPIC. Like Donna, I'd like to thank our event sponsors today, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation and the California Endowment. I mean, we truly live in an era of reform. I mean, it's breathtaking, all the changes that are occurring in California, you know, with healthcare reform and governance reform and fiscal reform, legislative reform, and our job at PPIC is to keep track of these issues and raise awareness of these issues, and we can't do it unless we have support from others, and we appreciate the support that makes this event and many of our activities around monitoring reform in California possible. I'd like to talk with you today about a new report, which is called Improving California's Democracy. And I'm going to briefly discuss some of the findings. You'll see a copy of the report, which came out today, in your packet of materials. And essentially, I'm the warm-up act for a couple of tremendous panels that we have with a very talented moderator in Pat Morrison, and I'm so glad that Pat joined us from Los Angeles today, and we have, you know, terrific panels that will, and I thank the panelists for taking the time to come here today and be part of this and tell us about what we know about what's happened so far in reforms and what's on the to-do list as we go forward. When you're a pollster, like I am, you wherever you go this time of year, people want to hear about what your new poll has to say. And so I should just disclose, first of all, that I don't have a new poll, but we will have one soon. But what we did for this project is that we went back and took a look at the results of all of the polling we've done in 2012 between January and July. We put all the results together of about 8,000 interviews with voters for this publication. We also went out and did eight focus groups in 4 different locations throughout California in May, June, July, and August, and heard firsthand from Californians about, in different parts of the state, north, central, and south, young and old, very diverse groups of voters, how they feel about their government. We went back and looked at some of our time trends from a presidential election in 2000 to compare to the presidential election year today in 2012 to see where the electorate stands today compared to where it was. And I also talked with my colleagues in public opinion in Washington. I had a chance to visit with both the survey director for the Pew Research Center, Scott Keeter, and John Cohen, who's the polling director for the Washington Post, about what they're seeing in terms of the polarization of the electorate nationally. Some of the conclusions that we got from our surveys go beyond just looking at the surveys to what does the Secretary of State tell us about the results of voter participation and voter registration over time. Some things that I'd just like to point out to you about how we are viewing the issue of improving California's democracy. First of all, we've got some issues with voter registration. In the report, we point out that millions of Californians are not registered to vote. We have issues with voter participation that go beyond the registration, in which millions of people who are registered to vote are not voting, and this is particularly noteworthy in our primaries. As we've changed our primaries in various ways, we still have the pattern of low participation. And when we get to the elections themselves and who's voting, as well as if we just look at the group of registered voters in the state, we continue to have a pattern which we pointed out to several years ago of what we refer to as an exclusive electorate. An electorate in which the makeup of the voters in California does not represent who the average Californian is today. California voters tend to be better educated, more likely to be homeowners, more likely to be white, older, and have higher incomes than average Californians. So beyond that, the survey results that we've been collecting over time point to some really key voter groups to look at this year. And we, first of all, point to the growth of the independent voters, which for a while were called decline to state voters and now are called no party preference. Whatever you want to call this group of voters, it's one of the fastest group of voters in the state. They tend to lean Democratic, and as I have described them on a number of occasions, they have no interest in partying. That is, they have no interest in being part of a party. They tell us that they want to be independent. And they tend to be more moderate in their political views than either the Democrats or the Republicans in the state. When we look at the party members themselves, the Democrats and Republicans, we conclude, as lots of national studies have, that Republicans and Democrats are becoming more polarized over time. Democrats more likely to say that they're liberal, Republicans more likely to say they're conservative, and growing differences in how they view the roles of business and environmental regulation, the impacts of immigration, any number of issues if we compare 2000 to 2012, growing polarization. We point to the importance of the Latino vote, also a very fast-growing group of voters, accounting for, like independents, now about 20% of registered voters, according to our polls. What distinguishes Latino voters in our polls in terms of attitudes is perceptions and policy preferences around immigration tends to be the key issue that distinguishes Latino voters from other voters, and at this point in time, a group of voters that has been leaning Democratic. We also point to the importance of young people, young voters, whether you want to call the 18 to 25-year-olds or the 18 to 34-year-olds, however you define young voters, they tend to be more liberal and particularly different on social issues, whether it's same-sex marriage or legalization of marijuana. On a variety of social issues, they tend to have differing views. Today, most younger voters registering as Democrats, but large numbers also as independents. Last but certainly not least, the largest block of voters in California that we look at in this election would be women voters. 51% of all voters. We noted a big gender gap between Democrats and Republicans. On the women's vote, 58% of Democrats are women. Republicans, more 50-50. More women registered as Democrats than Republicans by about a 20-point margin. And gun control being, of all the issues that we've looked at in our polling this year, the one issue that really distinguishes women voters from all other voters. We find in our polling this year, during this very critical election year in California, some big areas of conflict across parties, some big areas of conflict in terms of the role of government, how Democrats and Republicans view taxes and services and budget preferences. And while Democrats and Republicans may agree on the need for the government to be constrained in its spending, they do not agree on what the effects of those constraints might be, and what we ought to do in an era in which government has had constrained spending because revenues have been flat or declined. There are some areas of consensus, but we find that the areas of consensus between Democrats and Republicans are pretty narrow or pretty constrained. Agreement that, for instance, on environment issues, that pollution and energy efficiency, those are the kinds of policies we ought to be promoting, but disagreements on everything from oil drilling to nuclear power. Consensus that the federal and state government are wasting money, too much money, on the state of the state and on the economy's direction. So consensus that things aren't going well. That's one area in which Democrats and Republicans find a lot of agreement in the state. And what we point out in our report, importantly, is that a lot of consensus around the need for the citizens to weigh in through the initiative process, and the need to move services and power and authority from higher levels of government down to the local level of government. Those are sort of consistent themes. So where does this leave us in terms of the mood for reform in California? Californians feel strongly that change is needed in our government, and they feel strongly that they want to be part of that change and that they want to see more things done at the local level than the state level. In our report, which is being released today, we say that in order to really prepare fully for the types of change that Californians are longing for, then we face a number of challenges in our democracy. Many people are left out of the voting process, and at a time when many Californians will be making important choices at the ballot box. And our initiative process, while it's a cherished ideal by many Californians, it's one in which they say it has a number of problems. So in our analysis, we then come down to three recommendations, issues which we think are essential ingredients for a democracy that are built around local government and ballot initiatives. We're really focused on how do we get more active and meaningful citizen participation in elections. We recommend the following actions. First of all, very concerted efforts to engage emerging groups of voters. Some of these groups currently have very low votes of voter registration, younger adults, Latino voters. Others are often non-voters, such as independent voters, especially when it comes to primaries. We secondly point to the need to what we describe as bridging the knowledge gap. Californians are asked to make a lot of important decisions at the ballot box, and they ought to have the best information available to them, and they don't always have the best information available to them. Last but not least, we suggest also in this era of voters making decisions that we increase transparency in the initiative process. Transparency about who is supporting the initiatives, who's collecting signatures for what purposes, where the money is coming from for commercials, and really more of a full disclosure. Because many Californians are distrustful of really who's behind what with the initiative process. We feel that everything that we're seeing in this 2012 election, the low voter turnout that we saw in June, a ballot in November that is filled with complex and confusing initiatives, will be repeated in 2014 and beyond. There are a number of obstacles to engaging Californians given the high level of political disillusionment and their belief that voting bears little relationship to the central concerns in their lives. We feel that there have been a number of good efforts that have been made in terms of the open primary, redistricting, vote by mail, just recently, same-day registration and online registration, but state government can't do these things alone. There's no way that state government can overcome some of these obstacles that are hampering citizens from participating in the fully participating in the election process. There should be many opportunities for governments, local governments and civic groups, business and labor interests, foundations and nonprofits to work together at increasing civic participation and improving elections. We feel that in doing so, we will better meet the needs of California's democracy in the 21st century. Thank you. I wonder if I might take a question or two, since we just released the report. Yes, Sunny.
So Mark, you said that people, Californians, don't participate in voting. They're interested in terms of democracy and more people voting. Is there a connection between voting and being involved in their own government in between elections? Actually, you all heard me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there should be. And, if we look more broadly at local participation, we see that the same patterns exist. So the issue is broader even than just voting. It's being involved at the local level. And we think this is so important because if we're truly going to move responsibilities down to the local level, unless we have citizens who are actively engaged at the local level, we're going to just run into all sorts of difficulties. Yes?
Quick question. You were distinguishing between decline to state voters and commented on independent voters. I often think of independent voters as a party and decline to state as no party, but could you talk about that more?
Everybody, well, initially we called decline. The Secretary of State referred to voters who were outside of the major parties or the third parties as independents, and then we moved on to describe them as decline to state, and then now the current nomenclature is no party preference. But we are not talking about party ID in this case. We're talking about how people tell us they're registered to vote, and they're registered to vote as decline to state or no party preference, depending upon when they did the registration. So it's not a state of mind, but a state of how you actually vote. Yes? Or register. Yes?
So you're expressing a concern and evidence that people don't participate at a local level or aren't engaged in their governmental processes at a local level, but I'm curious if you don't find that's part of a larger phenomenon, because one reads in the paper that church membership is down and there's the bowling alone phenomenon. So is there a difference between governmental engagement and other engagement?
Well, the difference between governmental engagement is that we're talking about making some fundamental changes right now in how who's going to be actively participating in the decision making. And the more the local governments are engaged in decision-making, the more we need local voters to be involved. If you look at what voter registration has been like in local elections, and you think about a transfer of power or money or responsibility to the local level, it's a concern. But you're right. You've got a larger societal issue that's at work here. But keep in mind that what Californians are telling us is that they have more confidence in what goes on the local level. They don't have much confidence in what's going on at the state and federal level. They want to see things move to the local level. They want to have more power themselves to make decisions. And we're saying that if we want to have that kind of democracy, we're going to have a lot of work to do for that to be effective. Peter?
In my lifetime, in my experience, the biggest single act moving power from the local level to the state was Proposition 13.
Right.
How do you make these reforms? How do you restore authority and accountability to the local level without rewriting Prop 13?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that there are ongoing efforts. You see, and I think in the first panel we can hear about that. In the second panel, there are things on the ballot, two of them, which have to do with that, the extent to which people are knowledgeable and aware and want to make those changes. But can you do it without fundamentally changing the revenue system? That'll be a good question for Jerry Parsky, who's thought a lot about this, both with Think Long and with the 21st Century Commission. So hopefully he will show up. But that's a fundamental question, is what do you do about rebalancing the flow of revenues if local governments are truly going to have power separate from the state? I better take just one more question, or the first and second. I'm just a warm-up act, remember. Yes, I'll take one all the way in the back, and then I better get off the stage, or Pat's going to be upset with me. I don't want that to happen.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
I'm Alexander, California
Yes.
Voter Foundation. I'm happy to hear your recommendation coming out today about the need for more transparency, particularly with campaign finance donors in the initiative process. There was a bill, unfortunately the governor vetoed it, by Senator Mark DeSaulnier that would have done just that. And the reason the governor vetoed it was because he said it would present an unfair picture of both sides because opponents come in so much later in the process and the ballot pamphlet's printed 6 months prior. Can you help with any particular recommendations that can get us past that obstacle with trying to get this kind of reform implemented?
I really go to the end of this report, which says it's going to take a concerted effort, business and labor, Democrats and Republicans, local government, civic groups. It's not no one entity on its own making recommendations specifically about how to get from here to there, but recognizing that we have a problem and that we need a better mechanism for initiatives and disclosure and information sharing. I mean, we need debates about initiatives too. I mean, we really need debates, I think, and we don't have them. We wait for the next 30-second commercial. And thank you, Kim, for your work too. Thanks.